Well, Terry, it's day 2. Are you ready?
I am, Phil. I am really excited about day 2. We got some great topics for the breakout groups.
We sure
And
do. And we're going to be starting real soon here too. So everybody that's waiting will be coming in.
absolutely. So, Phil, I was talking to Joe Morris, and Joe was talking about how actually some of the funds from the CARES Act are finally being released, particularly Department of Labor and the funds that are coming in for to address the some of the issues around fraud, waste, and abuse on the unemployment systems. So it's interesting that there's still CARES Act funding coming out, even though we're all talking about ARP and infrastructure.
Yeah, that is interesting. And, it's such an important topic too with unemployment insurance and all the efforts that have been underway to try to protect all that. So that's really good to know that that's coming out, or it is out.
Right. Well, I think, Phil, you remember I had that opportunity to participate in a congressional hearing with Doug Robinson and Alan Sharp. And as you recall, they kind of came after me on what the states were doing on fraud, waste, and abuse. So it'll be interesting as these monies come in, to see how they're actually going to be used and, who's going to take advantage of them.
And I think there was a 2-prong attack on you too, Terry, where they were talking about fraud, waste, and abuse on the unemployment side, but also the federal money coming over and how whether that,
Right.
Whether there be fraud or abuse in that. It was a really interesting question, but you did a great job bringing them back to topic.
Yeah,
So
I kind of
well
had to sidestep it. I think that was
Yes, you did.
my DoD training about being sure you don't necessarily have to answer the question.
Yeah. Yeah, that was an interesting, that whole hearing was very interesting on local
Yeah.
governments and technology and everything. So yeah, it was very well done.
Yeah, yeah. So it's I think that both state and local government are just going to have to keep their eye on these funds. It isn't necessarily what happens on day one when they come out, but and as Alan Cox is mentioning, it's really not just about labor, but there are other organizations where funds are being reallocated, and so Joe's going to talk about all that because he's keeping track of it. God love him, because I don't know that I would have the patience to read through all that legislation.
Well, and then how it will come out over time too, right? So there'll be rules promulgated, and then everything else that'll happen. Then there'll be compliance issues. I think it's very interesting. This is such a big number. When they pass the infrastructure bill, there's a lot of money that goes into a lot of different places. So
Yeah.
It will be something very important to keep track of for sure.
Well, that's one of the things we're going to chat about in our cybersecurity breakout session. It really is thinking into all of these different funding sources, and to some extent, it's a little bit overwhelming.
You bet it is.
To really know how to actually deploy it almost becomes a skill set issue.
You bet. Well, Terry, I think we're there. So it's all yours.
All right. Yeah. Well, we got people coming in. And so I think we've got everybody in. And so we'll get started. All right. Well, welcome back, everybody, to day 2 of our Digital State CIO Summit. This is our favorite event of the year. Obviously, we would love to be together face to face, but we're going to do it virtually again this year. I think everyone probably pretty much knows Phil and I from yesterday and from other events. But again, my name is Terry Takai. I'm a vice president for the Center for Digital Government. And my partner in crime is Phil Bertolini, who is also a vice president at the center. All right, so we're just going to go through again the same housekeeping notes from yesterday. And so here they are. That gives you some idea on the event format and how you can participate. You'll notice that you're all on mute again, and you'll be on mute until we get to the Q&A with our 2 keynote speakers. Again, just to repeat, you guys are all Zoom experts, so we suggest that you go to speaker view when Dustin and Joe are speaking, and then we'll go back to gallery view for the breakout sessions and the CIO roundtable. Again, we encourage everyone to use your chat feature to communicate across organizations. Now, we had a little bit of a Zoom glitch yesterday where we weren't able to, in some sessions, actually chat with another individual in that same session. We think that that's fixed, but we would suggest if you're not sure about that, that you send an individual chat to either Phil or I, and that way we can make sure that we're getting it and that we're watching it, because we had a little bit of a challenge, but you know, we think that we have that fixed for today. So apologies, you know, for any of the challenges yesterday, but again, we want to make sure that works because we want to make sure that you all have that opportunity not only to talk in a group setting, but also to be able to do introductions and meet each other, which we know is really important to you through the chat function. Again, we always encourage you before you come to any of these sessions to make sure, you know, that you've updated to the latest version of Zoom. I know I got to remember it every once in a while, but again, you know, if you're having any issues at all, you know, let's try it and let's make sure that it's working. All right. The questions for the Q&A portions are again going to be with a virtual hand raise. So I think you all know where those buttons would be. And then again, when we come to go into gallery view, we really would love that you all turn your camera on. Because again, we want to make sure that we're seeing everybody and we're doing some great introductions and really getting to know each other. All right, so before we go into today's session, I'd really like to get some conversation with a couple of people on what your thoughts were about yesterday. And so I thought I'd start with Ellen Cohen, who is new to our government, basically our government summits. So Ellen, can you give us your observations, you know, in terms of the session yesterday and kind of what you took away from it?
Yeah, hi everyone, Ellen Cohen. As Terry said, I am new to being a tech executive, so this is exciting to meet people. I was legal counsel for several years to Delaware Department of Technology and Information and IT attorney and IP attorney in a prior practice. So I really resonated with what she was saying about humility coming in and onboarding and really observing and respecting the work and the people that you're going to join, right? And taking your time through the process. And it's definitely hit right where I'm at right now. So I enjoyed listening to her.
Well, great, Ellen. Well, welcome. Welcome to the group. Yes. And welcome for being a part of you know, the community. Anybody else want to chime in on anything from yesterday? Just raise your hand and we'll get you in. Any other comments? Dennis, unmute yourself and I'd love to hear your comments. All right.
Oh, sorry.
There we go.
I think I was in mute battle with whoever's controlling the Zoom. You know that, like, I unmute and then I get muted, and we're just on off. So I just wanted to share that, you know, I was devastated that I didn't get 4 of the same number in my second roll yesterday, and I'm still thinking about it. It's really dwelling on my head. So that's all I wanted to share. Thank you.
Well, we got something coming up today, Dennis, so get your deck of cards ready. John.
I'm ready.
Get you unmuted here, John.
There we go. Hi, Terry.
Hi, John.
I'm a big space geek, just to level set. But the idea that technology transition, transformation takes a long period of time, takes a lot of people to make it happen. Really, NASA, the moon, space travel, it's really all about that broad set of contributions. And I think it's a great metaphor for what many of us are going through, right?
Yeah.
We build on the shoulders of giants, of those who came before us. And so yesterday was very inspiring and just a very gentle reminder that it takes the work of many to break free of your constraints, even if it's just an atmosphere.
Thanks, John. I love that. I love that way of kind of thinking about, kind of the broader view. Sean, welcome. What were your comments about yesterday? Get you unmuted here.
Unmuted. Thank you. My comments for yesterday was from the speaker, her talking about the excitement of all of this. And I just want to say thank you to you guys for welcoming me, being a new CIO, and thanks for the invitation to reach out to you. This is going to be a learning process. So I just want to say thank you.
Oh, well, welcome to the community, Sean. Again, everybody here is more than willing to help. The exciting thing is we have many of the CIOs that have joined in the last year because there's been quite a bit of turnover.
Okay.
And so we're all here to help, Sean. Whatever you need, just let us know.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we're going to get started on today's session. So Phil, welcome back to day 2. I know you have a really cool chance for Dennis to potentially win today. But how was your day yesterday?
It was great, Terry. Renee is so inspiring and her message was so on point. And it just shows too that when you have a large agency like that, the work that you still can get done and the great work that can be done by the CIO. But my modernization breakout session rocked. The people that were in there, we had a great conversation. It was just nonstop from beginning to end. And I thought the roundtable was really good too. It was one of those roundtables that just kept churning with great information. So it was a lot of fun yesterday, but we are going to have fun today too. So we have those breakouts. We're going to have incredible keynote, but then we're going to play a game at the end. So make sure you all have your deck of cards ready. We have a little bit of a game we're going to play towards the end. So we look forward to that. So Terry, yeah,
Michael's got his ready. So
they're already playing solitaire. No solitaire during the sessions. You just have to wait till the very end. All right, Terry, it's all yours.
All right. Well, today we're going to start with another keynote presentation, but this one's going to be really exciting. It's really about how to plan your technology agenda for the future. And then that's going to be followed by a look at the budget and the funding landscape that, is changing. It's changing on a daily basis, and we'll get a great update about that. So our keynote speakers today are our very own Dustin Heisler, who's our Chief Innovation Officer, and Joe Morris, who's the Deputy Chief Innovation Officer. Now, I know that most of you know Dustin and Joe, but just a little background for those of you that don't. As the finance director and later the CIO for Manor, Texas, a small town outside of Austin, Dustin quickly built a track record and reputation as an early innovator in civic tech. He was a member of Code for America's original steering committee. He pioneered the government use of commercial technologies, not before used in the public sector. And in 2010, he launched Manor Labs. It's a website that lets residents submit their own ideas and vote on other people's ideas up or down. A little scary to think that was 11 years ago now. And he was really at the forefront of making some of those things happen. He looked to the private sector to help broaden the adoption of these and other civic innovations and joined the California-based Spigot as Director of Government Innovation. While there, he helped crowdsourcing and innovation management and implementing that software. And he was able to help design and deploy programs for New York City, Bogota, Colombia, and even the NASA Langley Research Center. He's been featured in Wired, Fast Company, Wall Street Journal, and the Today Show. Now, he is eRepublic's Chief Innovation Officer. And with that role, he helps to shape our products, services, and future direction. He leads eRepublic Labs, which is a market connector created as an ecosystem to educate, accelerate, and ultimately scale technology innovations within the public sector. So I want to point out that really important role that I know all of you know us through the Center for Digital Government, but you might not know that Dustin's role also is to try to stay ahead of the technologies and not only advise all of us, but also to advise companies as to things that they should be looking for to be able to work with all of you in the public sector and also present new and innovative ideas. Joe is a national keynote speaker on issues, trends, and drivers impacting state and local government and education. He has authored publications and reports on funding streams, technology investment areas, and public sector priorities. He leads our roundtables, projects, and initiatives focused on issues within the public sector. Joe has conducted state and local research since 2007 and knows the ins and outs of government on all levels. Joe has a background actually in government and international relations and actually did serve as support staff in the California legislature. So Joe is our go-to person in understanding the different funding streams, particularly everything that's happening now. And whoa, I said that wrong, Amanda. It's Maynard. Sorry, that's a great correction. But anyway, back to Joe. Joe will be able to answer questions about what's happening on the CARES Act funding, where we are with some of the ARP funding, and then also this gigantic now infrastructure bill that has opportunities in many different areas for technology infrastructure, particularly in broadband, but also in cybersecurity. So Joe and Dustin, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Terry, for that great introduction. We're excited to be here today to talk a little bit about some of the key trends that we're tracking. In looking at the title, of this presentation and kind of what we were tasked with, you all are trying to plan for an uncertain future. You've been through an incredible amount of change, and the common thread that we've heard is years worth of work crammed into a matter of months, and this next normal or new normal or whatever we want to call this period we're in now as a moving target. And with the rise of additional uncertainty through things like the Delta variant, it becomes more important than ever to really understand what's around the corner. And so we've been tracking through the Center for Digital Government, through Phil and Terry, Joe and our team, kind of what's around the corner, some of those key macro trends. We're going to dive into all of that and a little bit more so today. We'll have plenty of time for questions at the end of our presentation as well. And we've kind of divided the flow today into a series of buckets. We're going to talk about what's happening now from a macro trend standpoint. We're going to look at the next, so what's around the corner. And then we're going to talk about some of the foundational elements that are in place for agencies that have adaptive foundations to support the future and any type of uncertainty going forward. So we're super excited about this opportunity to share with you all today. We will make a copy of this deck available to each of you as well following today's presentation. So if that helps save your hand or your fingers from typing, hopefully that will be helpful. So let's start and dive into the now and just what's happening from a societal standpoint. We'll go through some of these key trends as well. So a couple of the trends that stand out to us. Number one, hyperconnectivity. So we are all walking hotspots of multiple connected devices that create a really interesting and unique moment in time as we think about just the landscape of connectivity that's around us and what's possible when we start to put these internet or edge connected devices to work. And we'll talk about some of those use cases as we go forward. There's 7.9 billion people on the planet. But we've now kind of reached this point where there's over 22 billion internet connected devices. And some of the fastest growing segments of connectivity aren't just phones, but now vehicles. And, when you buy a new car off the lot, it comes with a data plan now, and it's activated for a period of time if you continue to, renew it. So this is an important distinction because now everything that we buy, whether it's a refrigerator or a car or any type of consumer device, has a level of connectivity that plugs into an ecosystem, and that creates opportunity to automate, your life and do some really interesting things if you're into home automation. But it also creates challenges for us because we think about a lot of the cybersecurity attacks on government and critical infrastructure have been compromised consumer devices. So we're kind of in this, catch-22 of being able to leverage all of this new tech for new use cases, but we have to secure it as well, even things that are outside of our domain area. So trend number 2 is that there's a critical mass of individuals that are leveraging this infrastructure. And so, when you think about access and equity and inclusion, these are all important parts of it. But now when you look at the internet, we've reached this point, this tipping point where we've got a critical mass of individuals that are actually leveraging this technology to do things. And so those that have been left behind, there's a number of initiatives, and Joe can talk to length about the funding to kind of solve this digital divide. We know that's still an important aspect, but we're starting to see a lot of net new innovation in solving rural broadband, the digital divide, whether it's in low Earth orbit through companies like SpaceX, or whether it's by enabling new types of technology that provide low latency connections like 5G in a very broad way. These are all exciting developments and innovations that are going to really look at revolutionizing what's possible from that connectivity landscape. Here in the US, we've got about 85.8% of people that are leveraging the internet. Still a lot of work to do. It also depends on who you ask. The FCC has their own definition of connections. We have our own at the state level. So a lot of opportunity there and a lot of work that still needs to be done as we look at how to make sure that it's inclusive from a strategy standpoint. So it's super encouraging to see special districts and state agencies that are kind of taking that and really looking at developing programs to serve those that are not served today. The next trend is really important, and that's how we leverage all of that infrastructure. We've got a significant amount of energy and engagement. And if you look at what's happened with the internet in general, we've gone from a society of consumers where we would go online, we'd consume information, and really our experience was controlled, to a society of creators, where every 60 seconds, you can see on the screen, there's a vast amount of things that take place. And so we're all contributing vast amounts of data. Our data exhaust is exponentially increasing as individuals. And so this also creates opportunity and potential security vulnerabilities as well, as we think about everything that we're contributing into this environment. Now, the next trend is probably one of my favorites, and that's that everything that is digital and that was physical at one point is becoming a digital counterpart. So we're seeing this unbundling effort, and it's starting with a lot of the things that we used as consumers were replaced by technology. So you think about the fax machine, and you think about your Rolodex and maps and other types of things. These have all been unbundled and digitized. And this is an important distinction because even the office, when you look at the impact of COVID, has been replaced by technology, and certain functions now are able to be done completely remotely. I mean, government really proved that last year more than ever. And this unbundled trend is not stopping. Expectations have shifted with workers, and the new workforce recruitment and retention tactics also have to accommodate some of these unbundling trends that are taking place. And then we're also seeing just this pace of change. What feels like things speeding up is actually just that. Things are speeding up. Technology is accelerating, and it's accelerating at an exponential scale. And you look at just the amounts of innovations that have taken place. Government CIOs and IT executives can no longer sit on the sidelines and wait for the private sector to figure it out and then mirror that. They have to actually jump in, and they have to develop and plan and really look at their technology investments in new ways. And this is something that they have to do in partnership with the private sector, in partnership with one another. And we've been greatly encouraged by that. But this exponential curve of change is just that, and it's not going to slow down anytime soon. So now when you look at how change in government was historically done, think back a few decades ago, typically anything from the outside that tried to influence or change the structure, innovation or policy or frameworks in government, very little of that would actually break through to the public sector. Now where we're at is we've got very progressive leaders, those of you that are assembled today, and individuals in the community that have greater expectations on the public sector than ever before, are pushing together to move the needle of public sector innovation. So this is like the most exciting time to be in the public sector because everything's being reimagined right now. The textbooks of government are being written by those of you that are in the trenches, that are revolutionizing the way that you deliver services, that are moving your agencies into new forefronts, that are developing new ways of doing things, that are influencing not just your departments that you serve, but all the way down to the individuals that are consumers of your services as well. So it's an exciting time to be in the public sector. So I'm going to let Joe come in and talk a little bit about what we're seeing now in government, and then we'll shift gears and talk about the future. So Joe, I'll let you dive into this.
Awesome. Thanks, Dustin. Terry mentioned at the beginning right now, government's in a unique space in terms of what we're seeing now. We're getting this collision course with federal funding, right? And if you look at the impact of the pandemic, it's also made government have to wear a number of hats. And this is a great graphic from Deloitte that breaks some of those hats down, whether that's the role of a communicator, enforcing the various new regulatory environments that have come out, both in response to COVID and those that were there before. Obviously, an employer, state and local government itself is a massive employer. I think the latest figure that I saw, the state and local employment now exceeds 20 million. So one of the largest employers in the country. And of course, that is a service provider, but you're juggling all of those priorities and responsibilities at the same time. So that's something that's pretty unique to this space. And over the past year, we've seen a whole bunch of other new trends. Obviously, we've talked a lot in our research about the push and the rise of contactless government service, the push into digital government even stronger. Obviously, the COVID pandemic's driven a lot of that, right? And accelerated a number of those initiatives, whether that's new portals, whether that's vaccine-related initiatives, to just the fact that we're seeing a big push into digital government. Survey after survey that we're running continues to show that government's pushing down into that space. And the other part that was really exciting is on the citizen engagement aspect. I was talking yesterday, the whole push into virtual city councils and meeting with your local governments has allowed us to engage a new form of the population. Dustin's chart there, we talked about that two-way interaction is really true. It was really terribly difficult, but as a parent, even to get down to city council, if you wanted to influence something, you had to take the 3 to 4 hours out of your day to go sit down there, maybe get a babysitter. The barrier to entry was quite high, but now the opportunity to tune into a Zoom, be there for when you need to be there, is meaning that we're getting a more diverse representation at some of those citizen feedback loops. Obviously, Terry and myself and the team at the Center for Digital Government over the last couple of years have done a fair amount of research around state level adoption with AI. And we partnered up with NASCIO back in 2019 and have been doing this research annually ever since. And what we saw last year was the rise of the chatbot. And if I were just to kind of quickly summarize that, going back to the early research, there was a lot of apprehension around AI, specifically RPA. Fear around what does it mean to our staff, what does it mean to their jobs, and how is it going to change things? Fast forward to where we found ourselves on this last study, that fear has faded away quite quickly. And there's a lot more discussion around using chatbots to scale up where we couldn't meet the staff need. But furthermore, how do we free up staff to do much more rewarding work? And that's where it centered on this last year. So we're really excited right now. We're actually in field with the latest piece of work. So excited to see where we go next. Clearly, over the last couple of years, you couldn't have attended one of the events like this from us and not have us talk about privacy and data security. And in the pandemic, that didn't fade away. Obviously, we've had the efforts around contact tracing, which raised a lot of people's alarms on what is government doing in terms of tracing and doing these things. But now we get into a point where we're getting into a world where that's much more passive. It's crowdsourced. It's building out new use cases around things, but it's also creating a fragmented government experience. But that's to say, and I think we'll talk about it a little bit later, legislatively, we're not at a space yet where the activity around privacy is slowing down. Privacy, data security, cybersecurity for that matter, are all still top of mind and top legislative and elected leaders' priorities, which you all know quite well. And then we've seen the rise of third-party experiences, where the experience with interacting with government isn't necessarily controlled by you all. There's a group sitting between us and you. Groups like YoGov, for example, that are allowing you to book a government service, be that with your unemployment agency, be that with the DMV, or even with other experiences. We've also seen that at the federal government level, where you quickly find out that you need to travel, but you don't have a passport. Instead of interacting directly with the federal government, there's a whole bunch of passport third-party services. The same thing around registering your car vehicle, getting your car smogged. There's a whole new suite of players that are starting to sit between and removing some of the fragmentation and friction that exists in government services. Now, the part that really excites me, and we actually just wrapped up some research just the other day on this, is the shift to cashless. Digital payments, all of these digital interactions, right? We've seen state DMVs over the past year or so move into digital wallets. And now we're starting to see the need to move into these kind of mobile and cashless payments. Frankly, we've seen a lot more traction on this at the state government level. The research that we just wrapped up with the local government, and the adoption there is still pretty small, But as you begin to see the demographics in government and the demographics in the country rather shift, you start to understand that we need new ways of engaging constituency as well. And this move into getting in front of the smartphone, the mobile device, which you can't see because of the virtual background, will be the next frontier. Another question that I think we get asked a lot is, great, we've seen a lot of change over the last year, right? Tremendous amount of fragmentation, a lot of agencies and departments doing what they need to do to survive, a significant push into automation, but what's going to stick? What's really going to be here long term? And I think that's where we find ourselves now. Dustin and I talk about this quite often, that we're headed into this period of the great reconciliation, where you all right now may be wrapping your arms around your respective agencies and departments, trying to figure out what the heck happened over the last year, what needs to stay, what needs to go, and what can be expanded upon. And I think we're also looking at that in this lens of the federal funding as well. Heck, we're getting a lot of federal funding. I mean, mind-boggling in some cases when you look at verticals like education and health and human services. But at some point, that funding is not going to be there anymore. So we also have to look at this in terms of what can we sustain long-term. So piece of video, big winner. I mean, whether you look at our data, whether you look at data from Pew or the data that you see on the slide here, I mean, we are consuming more digital media in staggering degrees. Events like these, everything's a video, audio podcasts, you name it. Video is a standout winner, and we've seen that play a critical role in terms of engaging constituents too, whether it's live streams from your governors, live streams from your mayors. Heck, how many of us got to know our county health officials over the past year when we may have had no idea who they were before? But now we're seeing government engage us on video and meet us where we are, whether that's on the social media platform of our choosing. They're seeing a much more omni-channel approach to engaging constituents in their homes. And that leads us into a very important piece. And this is something we have to be aware of. Even though we've seen a rise maybe in trust in local government trust has increased, but it's still pretty challenged, particularly in response to this highly politicized environment that has been the pandemic, right? With the various mandates and shifts in openings and reopenings. The engagement points, the push to video, the push to meeting people where they are, the push to accelerating around these engagement channels, we're only going to go to help increase trust in government. And as you look at this survey, the Edelman Trust Barometer, we actually see that state and local government is faring better when it comes to trust in their government than that of the federal government. So Dustin and I have taken a couple stabs at this graphic over the past year. We started out with the new normal. We didn't have a better term for what it is now, so we called it the new normal. Maybe it's anything but normal. But either way, we see kind of 8 attributes really standing out here. Across the state and local landscape, a significant push into the infrastructure and process modernization. Dustin talked earlier about that kind of exponential curve, and I think one thing we have to get used to is that we're not going to slow down whenever we get to post-pandemic. We just got to get comfortable with this new rate of speed. Many of you may be grappling with the terms that you've got a new distributed workforce in some degree. So how do you work on supporting and enabling them to succeed long-term in a remote environment? Well, the first step to doing that is enabling connectivity and access. The federal government's put a substantial amount of funding around this. You've got $10 billion potentially up for grabs through the American Rescue Plan, through the fiscal relief funds that can go to infrastructure projects or broadband. Over $7 billion through the Emergency Connectivity Fund for schools and libraries. And the hopefully soon to be passed and implemented infrastructure bill includes $65 billion for connectivity to close the homework gap and to get out to our rural communities. But as we move into a world where everyone is connected and the large swaths of people are working remotely, now we got to deal with securing the new edge. That may not be an edge at all. People are everywhere. We've seen the critical role that data can play. How do we operationalize and manage data effectively to make the next decision, to glean those insights? And while we're doing all of this, and we have the federal funding crashing in on us, and that doesn't mean that we're not focused on budget and cost control. All of our surveys, our digital state surveys, digital cities and digital county surveys, pointed out that the number 2 overall priority for all of our CI community is budget and cost control. And we typically see that because all of you are looking at this going, hey, I got this great funding. It's temporary, but it can still be transformational. So we have to look at this and be mindful of this funding cliff that can present itself. And as we begin to work differently, and the work of government is being done differently, we now have to think about how do we redefine the organization? our management structures, our roles, our skill set, the entire government workforce to meet the new realities of today. And then lastly, probably the thing that gets me excited the most is someone that tracks the GovTech market as a whole and the size of the market and the investment patterns is the pace of change, but how quickly we're adapting to new technologies or existing technology platforms to meet new needs. So that's something too, I think that's pretty exciting. And I'd say if I would just wrap up this last slide here is also the importance that, and I think the recognition of importance that elected leaders have walked away with this moment in time in terms of the value of technology. So earlier I talked about those CIO priorities. Hopefully many, or if not all of you have seen this, but these are the top 10 CIO priorities in areas of increasing importance and focus for our CIO community. And you can see it. Cybersecurity didn't move at all. It's still everyone's number one overall priority, but we've got a big focus on budget and cost control. That push to contactless government services has driven that, number 3 priority here at citizen engagement and experience. And while you see things like cloud slightly drop down or transparency and open data, those don't mean they're going away. We've had a different, shift in the overall priorities. If I'm looking at this or looking at all layers of government, I'm walking away from this saying, hey, we're focused on cost control. We've got a continuous focus on cybersecurity, but it's the infrastructure modernization, the automation that's going to be a key play that I'm seeing right now. That's going to be a focus going forward.
All right, so now let's talk a little bit about the next. And so Joe and I are going to kind of go back and forth on these to talk about some of the key trends that we're seeing here around the corner that we think you should make note of. So I think, the first thing that we're seeing is just around this government to the edge. And so, this is happening in a variety of different ways, but you're seeing a lot of intermediaries coming in, trying to take government services, like even identity, something that's super complex, often very proprietary, and take that to the point where it's portable, where it's available within your phone. It's something that's transactional that you can use to go through the airport. And so this is a key aspect that is going to enable a variety of other use cases to emerge, as the front door of government no longer is always infrastructure that government builds or controls itself. Now agencies are extending those capabilities all the way down to identity and authentication and access management into third parties that are giving new capabilities, new life, and ultimately creating a more seamless experience for citizens. That's all part of the plumbing that's going to be required to support this new future reality.
Hybrid work, just talked about this a little bit earlier. I think for a large portion of your workforce out there, the idea that aspect of them or portion of them are going to be working from hybrid is likely very, very true. And you can see that no real substantial productivity loss by going remote. In fact, we quickly went last year from concerns over, hey, are my employees going to work, to my employees are working too much and we're concerned with burnout. And now we're putting in the tools and the protocols in place to avoid that. But we've actually seen a productivity gain in many cases.
Absolutely. The next thing is, really around predictive and behavioral feedback loops. So when you think about government services today, they're not always designed with feedback loops in mind. Maybe I go to a state website, I start filling out an application to get a license or permit. If I'm filling out the wrong application, at what point do I learn that? Is it after I submit and a human engages and determines that I filled out the wrong thing? Or is it as I'm going and it determines that based on the input that I provided, that I actually need to fill out a different form, that I need to go to a different place? And so we see the rise of these predictive and behavioral feedback loops as a way to engage and really design services that are human-centered. And that doesn't just mean that it's easy for people to use. Human-centered design is about building real-time feedback loops into the process so that that entire experience is really designed to maximize that end user's flow and their journey along the way. Now, the net benefit of that is that saves the human time on the back end going through and actually dealing with inaccurate or forms that were filled out in the wrong place. So there's an augmentation aspect of this that's incredibly important, as well as agencies look to get additional gains and maximize the finite resources and staff that they have.
Now, we talked, Dustin, a little bit earlier about identity. Obviously, now we're starting to see with GDPR, the focus on personal data, this move to decentralized identity too. So a market for your personal data. And we talked a little bit about that. Maybe it was a year or so ago that maybe we as individuals, there's a value on our identity. And that could be something that we see. I think we saw California push forward on a data dividend piece of legislation as well. So that's something too that the focus on identity, citizen data in particular, and the value of it will be something we're going to look forward to going forward.
Absolutely. And just to add on to what Joe said, I mean, when you saw what happened with GDPR in the States, as soon as GDPR was passed, all of a sudden states started coming in and trying to legislate privacy. It remains to be seen whether the feds come in and try to connect the dots there. But as the EU expands into now, this concept of allowing people to monetize their own data, what's going to be the state response? And Joe, pointed out California is definitely doing something here, but what other states are going to follow? So from another macro trend standpoint, when you think about government services and even some of the core knowledge that government has around laws and data and other types of things, they often require going to a specific place, doing a search, generating a spreadsheet, right, going through it. And if you're a master of Excel, you can do some damage. But in the future, these services and these laws and knowledge banks will be accessible through APIs. So imagine being able to ask your voice assistant, when a certain ordinance or law or piece of legislation was passed, but also what the impact of it was, right? When you start to get into actually being able to quantify context based on voice queries, or maybe it's a text query, maybe it's something you just go to a website to do. So more and more of the knowledge layers of the public sector will be accessible through automated ways to allow you to find the right service at the right time. Same thing when it comes to those services themselves. Now you can go and you can install apps on your voice assistants or on your phone. You log in and you can do all kinds of slick transactions. But what if you didn't have it on your phone? What if you just said, hey, voice assistant, did I pay my taxes this month? And it went and found the relevant service. It used your decentralized identity on your phone to authenticate yourself and actually was able to generate a response back to you to say, yes, Dustin, you paid your taxes to the great state of Texas. So these are the future services that we see that are going to need to be leveraged, and they're going to require a lot of complex foundational work. But it's interesting to see the innovations that are happening at that identity level today that will become the killer app to all of these use cases going forward.
I'd love to say, hey, virtual assistant, read the infrastructure bill.
That's right. I used to use the virtual assistant names, but I have so many in my office that they all start talking back. So that's why I just replace it with virtual assistant.
I did think about trying to see what would happen. And
yeah, don't say any of the names because then mine will go up.
Another macro trend is pushing forward into the virtual assistant space is humanized AI interactions, right? So you can see them here. These are all bots. They're not actually real people, which is fantastic. And I know we've seen a tremendous push at the state level in terms of the move to AI and chatbots. This represents the next frontier in terms of that virtual but highly personalized and real connection to a bot.
All right, and then we've got ubiquitous connectivity. So as we look at not just the acceleration of available connectivity, but also the increase in speed, I mean, by the end of the decade, it's anticipated that users will be able to pull a terabyte down from their home internet connections in most places. I mean, you could download all 238 episodes of Friends in a second, but outside of that, what other use cases is this going to enable? When you think about hybrid work and the zero latency type use cases that will emerge, even self-driving vehicles, that connectivity landscape from an availability standpoint and speed standpoint are going to be foundational elements of use cases we can't even begin to imagine. Government's role is going to be how to regulate that, right? When all of a sudden consumers have access to terabit connections at home, what happens if, all of their IoT devices are connected into a botnet and their fridge starts doing, denial of service attacks on critical infrastructure? Everybody is going to have to start to think about this consumer level of cybersecurity. It's going to become more important than ever.
We talked earlier about the API standpoint. We also think that the idea of the death of the standalone app. Right. We talk a lot about building the plumbing of government, and the idea that the future may be in the API space and building that connective tissue between your services and the marketplace.
All right, so there are some challenges that we have to think about as part of this as well. So, number one, you've got this whole regulatory landscape is very fragmented across the country. States will regulate certain things. We've seen, facial recognition and AI and algorithmic decision-making start to pop up, and even cybersecurity legislation is popping up across the country and states, but it's not connected and it's fragmented. And this can create a lot of complexity when it comes to standardization and best practices and other types of things. So, watching this regulatory landscape for emerging tech is going to be really critical. And then for you all, it's going to be being a part of that conversation, right? I mean, when it comes to legislators that are regulating what they don't know, it's going to be important for the actual IT leaders for state government agencies to be part of the conversation, to help shape the conversation, and really look at creating these sandboxes for new tech that can open all kinds of new possibilities for us. We just have to design it in a safe way.
One of the things I'll add to your slide there, we looked at the cybersecurity legislation not too long ago. And it's very uneven. You've got kind of a common language, but the definitions aren't common. So everyone talks about having reasonable security, but defines reasonable security slightly differently. So we also got to get to a point where we've got a more comprehensive and cohesive definition across the states as well. All right, and on to the next macro trend. Users will have greater control over their data and how it's used. And we saw that come to fruition, obviously, with GDPR and the various privacy legislations that have rolled out across the country in a number of states. But we also see it from the providers themselves. Now you've got providers like Apple rolling out their own privacy protections, really clamping down on what platforms, social media platforms can advertise and how they use your data. And we have to get used to an environment from a government perspective where your constituents are going to have greater use of not just Facebook and Twitter, but when it comes to your services as well.
And as we've seen, consumer expectations will shape their expectations for the public sector as well. So as they're conditioned by these experiences, so it's just kind of a warm up back to what's coming next. The next kind of big trend is just around this focus on inclusive and equitable experiences. I mean, I think this is more important than ever as we think about all of these new technologies and these seamless experiences, making sure that we don't leave people behind, that we find ways to ensure that services are still accessible. People still will show up to physical buildings to, have physical services rendered. And so maintaining and designing inclusivity into those experiences is going to be incredibly important. And we've seen states like Illinois, hire chief equity officers and others that have really focused on taking this and putting a C-level contact in charge of that to make sure that focus is always kept on that wider experience and making sure that we don't leave anyone behind.
Yeah, California actually just has that in their budget too, to create that new office as well. And then finally, navigating technical debt and the new total cost of ownership. Dustin and I actually just wrapped up a webinar this week on state budgets. And one of the big questions that came in was this concept of total cost of ownership over and over again. And you can see, whether it's through the CARES Act funds or the American Rescue Plan or the modernization funds that are for IT and cybersecurity that are actually in the infrastructure bill. Government's got to take a look at modernization holistically. How can we take advantage of the federal funds to move the needle forward? But then again, how do we sustain it when those funds dry up? Because they're absolutely going to do that, and you don't want to get stuck holding the bag.
Absolutely. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about some of the foundational elements that need to be in place to have kind of an adaptive organization to really prepare for a lot of these future trends going forward. We'll divide it into a series of layers to kind of represent some of the elements that need to be in place. We'll start first with infrastructure. Joe's going to talk about the human layer of government, and then we'll wrap up with intelligence and some next steps for you all. So I'll kick it off with infrastructure. So as we know, having scalable and agile infrastructure is incredibly important. It's even thinking about the governance process that rides on top of that infrastructure. It's got to be something that's conducive to adaptability on a regular basis. And so, think beyond cloud and think about the actual processes that orchestrate technology investments. We have to make sure that we're reevaluating those. I mean, the 5-year strategic plans are kind of out the window because technology is moving so quick. It's almost impossible to plan that far out. So we really need to look at this in an agile and iterative way. Now, we also know that there's a lot of opportunity. When you look at, there's still a good amount of legacy technology systems that exist at the state level. There's still screens like this. And so, we have to start to think about how do we realistically tackle this and how do we do it in a sustainable way? As Joe mentioned with total cost of ownership, this is an important question that many of you are probably thinking of now as you look at dollars that are available to go and modernize these systems very quickly. How do you do that at scale? How do you do that and sustain those investments going forward? You also have the rise of leveraging what we already have in the field. So when you think about what makes a smarter state government agency, it's not going out and deploying a bunch of net new technology, but sometimes it's leveraging what you have and thinking about putting it to new uses. So when you think about a lot of the existing systems that are out there, the existing kind of Internet of Things or industrial Internet of Things, how do we make those smarter? How do we leverage those edge points of government to extend our capabilities right now, to become smarter at the data that we're using right now? We saw that in response to COVID, right? A lot of the data collection that informed the Johns Hopkins dashboard was just leveraging edge processes and edge inputs that were already in place. No one went out and deployed a bunch of new technology. That kind of came later. And then we have open data. Data is at the forefront of all this. We know open access to data is incredibly important, not just for consumer experience and citizen engagement, but it's really about what I call eating your own dog food. It's got to be something that's consumable to your departments, to your agencies as well. Don't design something for citizen only. Design something that has a dual prong approach that can be useful for a citizen that's interested in it, but it can also be put to practice and put to use in helping you better understand the data that's at play. And part of that comes down to kind of the elephant in the room, standardization. We know that there's significant opportunity to standardize data in government. This is going to require partnerships on it, right? We've seen some partnerships on standardizing identity and access management protocols, but we really need to start to look at how do we standardize not just those data sets and those approaches, but how do states create standards for all kinds of like economic development data sets, other things that would be useful to understand your ERP data, your IT performance data, even cybersecurity related data in the context of other individuals based on their trends as well. So Joe, I'll let you break down the people side of things.
Sure, and there's already a bunch of chat around the people aspect, talking about it being a people business and capacity. I think the trends that I walk away from this presentation, to your point, Dustin, is data, and the other one's identity, right? A big push into these scalable and focuses on identity. The mobile driver's license, I think, is going to be a big thing to watch over the near term. Whether it's Utah, there's a whole bunch of pilots now out there where you've got this push into this digital wallet. And as we look at the larger trends that are going across state and local government, whether it's some sort of vaccine identification, it's going to be interesting to see how some of this all comes together. And to your point about that connective tissue and that earlier graphic you had about all of the data elements, we've got these layers too when it comes to this customer-centered or resident-centered experience. And while you put, whether it's your employees, the businesses that you serve, or your residents out there, it's the connection between the things that you build and the things that support that on the back end, right? The application layer and then the infrastructure on the back end. And all of that's got to be tied together to build this seamless resident experience. So that's the key. On-demand hybrid labor. We saw this pop up, maybe it was a couple years ago, I think now, Dustin, when we started to look through the budgets at the state and local level, we started to see localities and states tap into these on-demand work platforms, whether it's Upwork, whether it was Fiverr, all of these avenues to get at on-demand labor, maybe at a lower cost. And some of that may have been designed, but now we're starting to move into more critical aspects of on-demand work and even into the IT space. So we may see, as we push into an environment where, yes, right now budgets are flush, but as we start to see maybe a different push into on-demand work and hybrid work and remote work, this becomes the next thing to watch. And then we talked about this earlier on our kind of 8 attributes of the new normal. It's this moment in time is going to give birth to a new organizational model and a new way of operating for state and local government. Does it give birth to a more of a lean startup movement and that push into innovation? We saw over the years, at least I've been at the Center for Digital Government, different states do different things when it comes to building these sandboxes and innovation funding streams. I saw a little bit of that in some of the budgets I looked at this year, the kind of carve out to try different exploratory things, but also a new and refined way around project management. Obviously, for a number of years now, states and localities have pushed deeper into agile project management, but these are all things that we're going to begin to see take more root into an environment that's going to be managed differently, incentivized differently, and operate very differently going forward.
All right, and so now let's talk a little bit about the intelligence side of things. So, kind of back to the foundational layers of data that we talked about at the beginning, leveraging not just your own data, but other data as a part of that becomes key. So, you take data, you standardize it, then you start to integrate it. And so third-party data integrations, often are manifested through technologies like Waze and others today for transit-related planning. But imagine extending that third-party data integration to all kinds of other use cases. We know, for instance, your car vehicular data is being sold, and that can be very useful for doing all kinds of predictive policing and other types of incident response technologies. So tons of potential there when you start to look broader than the landscape of just the data that you control. Performance measures and metrics that are here, you can't really manage what you can't track and what you can't measure. And so, we saw the benefit of performance metrics really firsthand when it came to tracking and dashboarding COVID-19 and the related responses. What was working? How was it working? We were glued to dashboards that were out there, and we still are today as we kind of look at that. And so that's kind of conditioned us to really start to look at data differently in government. And so we need to start to get more proficient at setting up key performance indicators, really understanding where we should be in the context of others. That's kind of back to that standards conversation. When we have access to that data, then it becomes more useful. Then we can actually start to trend where we're headed, how we're doing, and share best practices that aren't just, words, but that are actually based on core metrics and responses. Then you've got this rise of contextual personalized experiences. So back to kind of the death of the app and what comes next and what Joe talked about with this API economy, the future is contextual and it's personalized. It's about anticipating need before you actually ask. So right now we think about experiences as being interactions that I have to go to a place and ask for a certain thing at a certain time. Well, think about your private sector experiences when you go to an e-commerce website. You're seeing a whole experience designed around your data, designed around what it is anticipating you might be interested in at that moment in time. And that is the same level of sophistication the government is going to be expected to deliver. If you go to a government website or portal, or maybe you don't even have to go there, you get a push notification on your phone that says, hey, you might want to do this. Hey, Joe, you haven't paid your taxes. You might want to go and take care of this right now. That's going to be more important than ever to start to think about how do we anticipate user need and design that into the overarching experience. We talked feedback loops as kind of one of our next macro trends. That's a big part of it. And not all feedback loops are positive. So what happens if someone has a negative experience? How do we capture that? How do we learn from that? How do we get better at ingesting that level of data? And that data that's really unstructured and not captured today, how do we put that back into the system to get smarter at making that system work better? And then government as an experience. And, whether it's API, whether it's a new technology that comes down the line, really thinking about how we deliver government and how we deliver our services, we have to think experiential. We have to think about the end user's experience, which could be an employee, it could be a business, it could be a consumer that's tapping into the services that we provide. And we have to design for that experience, that whole end-to-end process with feedback loops, with data standardization, with leveraging scalable technology. It's all about the experience and laying the foundation for that. So that was kind of a fire hose of trends with where we're at, what we're seeing kind of from a market standpoint, what we're tracking on next. We know that, there's a lot to do. And here are some kind of guiding practices and tips that we typically advise agencies on. Number one, anticipate the future. You don't want to be disrupted by it. And so you have to be proactive and really look at how do we test, how do we pilot, how do we understand these new technologies and put them into use. Focus on collaboration with other government agencies, with industry partners, with NGOs. What are the new public-private partnerships that are emerging? How do you start to leverage insights from your industry partners that are assembled today and to put them into use, to learn from it, to grow and to kind of come up with new models for government? And then you want to make sure you're really focusing on the foundational layers of government. If you think back to when COVID first hit, the agencies that were caught off guard were those that didn't have foundational elements in place to deal with things like telework and remote access and those types of things. There were foundational problems that had to be solved. When you look at the future, we're kind of in that moment in time right now. We're starting to reevaluate what needs to be in place for use cases I can't anticipate, that I can't predict, but I know will come. And I'm going to need to rapidly shift. I'm going to need to rapidly pivot, and I'm going to need to deliver services in new ways. That's this moment in time that we're in right now. And together, we know collectively, we can start to lay the groundwork for that. We can learn together. We can glean insights from our industry peers and from other non-governmental organizations and from each other to lay that groundwork. And so, the innovation surge that happened in response to the pandemic, we see continuing. We see this as a new era of the public sector, and we're more excited than ever with the work that you're doing. And we'd love to stay plugged into that and hear from you as we kind of go forward. And with that, I know we've got about 15 minutes remaining for some questions and answers. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll open up the floor to questions. If you have questions, you can use the virtual hand raise feature, and we'll tackle some of those in our remaining time. All right, Mark, we'll start with you. You should have the ability to unmute. There you go. All right.
So fascinatingly, great stuff. I took a bunch of notes along the way, and we could probably talk for 4 hours on all the topics. But the one that I think we will struggle with the most, and it's tied to all of this money that's coming in today, is recognizing the efficiency impacts on government for the technology investments that we're making, right? And really the need to think more holistically, not about spending in the technology budget, but looking at the overall governmental impacts of what we're doing with the kinds of things that you're talking about there, because the savings that we're generating will happen elsewhere. And the investments that we're putting in have to, may need a longer term sustainable path. Are you seeing anyone doing anything like treating that much more holistically from a how they view governmental budgeting and the impacts of this change, the upcoming changes that you were talking about?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We haven't seen it connected fully. I mean, there's definitely buckets of pilots that have been done to tackle, larger social issues where they try to track, the investment and technology process, people, everything else, and then the outcomes that you expect, especially when you get to the local levels of government, you see a little bit more of that. I think it is a wider issue, right? How do you track impact outside of just what you can measure from a technology standpoint down to the problem that you're looking at solving? And I think that even starts with the kind of problem framing phase of things, right? Like when you look at designing or investing in a certain level of technology or new type of service that you're going to deliver, what are the key things you're trying to solve? Not just in a generic way, but specifically in a measurable outcome way. And then how do you track that on the back end? And I think it's going to require a few things, especially at the state level. Standardization and access to some of the data, especially as you get further down. You're going to have feedback loops in the process in order to, be able to capture at certain points to really understand that. I think even ROI, right? Like, ROI is kind of the holy grail of a lot of these things. How do you tie back an investment in something and measure the impact off of it? That's something that I think, working with industry partners is going to be, more of a common practice. We see maybe even in procurements, we're starting to see a little bit of rumblings around making sure that you can measure and quantify impact of things as you go forward. So it could be an aspect there. Procurement's also a vehicle that people are looking at for standardizing data as well, where you bake it in and make it a part of the process. So a lot of work to be done. Not a silver bullet, but I think we've been encouraged by some of the initial activities that are taking place, but highly in the pilot stage today. Joe, I don't know if you've got any other thoughts on that one.
Yeah, pretty similar. We've seen it quantified a bit more on the citizen-facing front, right? Some of the automation plays. How did that result in a reduction in wait time? How many more cases were resolved without a personal touch? On the procurement side, interesting enough, we started to see some measurement and tracking just on like diversity and inclusion, and a lot of work to start tracking that and where things are going. So I think things are moving in the right direction on all this, but not someone that's got it figured out. Chris, you had your hand raised next, so thank you for being patient.
Oh, no worries. Thank you, Dustin. Thank you, Joe. This is Chris Adobe. I have a question that in the presentation you all mentioned about digital equity, inclusion, and certainly broadband is at the forefront of it. But when you look at customer or citizen experience being at the top of the list, at the top of the top 10 priorities, how do you see delivering a better citizen experience bridge the digital divide gap and bring more digital inclusiveness? Are there metrics that you would suggest that we look at?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Often where I start with that is understanding who your customer or who your citizen is today. So looking at kind of their personas, right? So understanding not just who they are, but how they're accessing services that are outside of government today. How do they buy groceries? How do they get around the community? Those types of things. Looking at really understanding the base of your customers, identifying how you're delivering services to those customers today, and then looking for gaps, right? So when it comes to designing a better experience, rather than coming up with what we think the experience might be, it's finding gaps based on how they interact with the world, other private sector companies, those types of things, and how they're accessing our services today. And then using that as a basis to go out and solve problems. There are some foundational things that we're going to have to tackle along the way, like you mentioned, digital divide, and kind of some of the basic requirements are going to be in place in order to make sure people are there. But even change management is a part of that, right? We think about that in the context of how we roll out new technology with our employees, but the same is true with how we roll out new technology with constituents and how we get them to understand how to use it and how to onboard with it. So happy to share more information. We kind of put together a little bit of a framework on some of this as well when it comes to the data side of things. But yeah, I think it's a great question, and one that requires really understanding your population. Yeah, Joe, anything you'd add?
Over the last decade or so, there's a very large app graveyard that exists of things that were built that weren't really needed. And we do a lot of survey work, kind of surveying our government audience and residents on what they think each other needs or wants. And there's often a disconnect in the prioritization. So getting at that information may help you understand what's really needed versus what's wanted.
Right. And understanding that it's contextual to the organization. So this is where having similar approaches isn't always the best practice, right? Because your population or your customers may be different than others based on their end behavior. So really understanding those core users and where they're at is going to be an incredible part of the process. Mike Leahy.
And the mute button is off.
All right.
Good afternoon. So,
Good afternoon.
as Mark said earlier, we could talk for hours, but one of the things that I'm very interested in and that we've noted here is that a great deal of the innovation that occurred was certainly out of necessity, but it was only allowed because we dropped all the regulations. And my simple example is the state of Maryland used to have a 40-page, lots of forms, about 5 hours for each interaction to fill out for remote work. All of that went away. All of that is coming back because we were in an emergent situation. So if we go back to normal, the agencies that are responsible for oversight of HR and other functions that have been heavily regulated in the past are arguing that we have to go back to the standard regulations. And I was wondering if other folks have seen that sort of pushback. And then secondarily to that, as you said, a lot of the innovation is tied to the hot topic of the week. So, security is always going to be a hot topic, but fraud, waste, and abuse of process is an incredibly hot topic now. I'm waiting to see if we find solutions to a number of these, or it is replaced by another hot topic before we actually address it in a meaningful way.
So you're right. I think we have to be careful about which parts of normal we want to rush back to.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think we talk about a new normal. We want to go back. We don't necessarily want to. No one's itching to go back to wait in line at the DMV, right? So we gotta be a little careful there. And to your point, I think on the other aspect, you're right. I'm happy to see that at least the funding finally came out for the unemployment insurance, fraud, waste, and abuse just yesterday or the 11th.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
We've been waiting since March to just figure out what the heck it could be and what does it mean to states. So you've got funding now there for cybersecurity, you got funding there for identity verification and a bunch of others. And that's just the first wave of that. Hopefully there'll be more. I do think that there is that piece that you're talking about is we do get caught up in, let's talk about the American Rescue Plan. Well, that's CARES Act money. Right. Now we're on to the next thing. Now we're talking about infrastructure. And that does kind of make people take a moment of pause and go, let me take stock of everything that's coming at me, make sense of all the funding streams that I can do, then do something strategic with it. And sometimes you're not afforded that luxury.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I totally agree. And I think, from a regulatory standpoint, we have to think about, regulatory sandboxes is kind of what I call them. We've seen them applied to some of the, micromobility landscape at the state level when it comes to like Uber and Lyft and some of these other technologies. But I think we have to start to look at, that kind of an approach, right? Rather than, especially with new technologies, right? You can't regulate what you don't know or understand. And so even when it comes to AI and algorithmic decisions, if you're putting in place regulatory frameworks without actually having any real data or utilization of it, how do you know that you're doing the right thing? And of course, there's some ethical bias things that are innate that need to be put in place. But I think understanding the technology is a key part. We've seen that with blockchain, right? And I think a lot of states experimented with it. They understood it. They looked at opportunities to leverage private sector partners for it. And then now, wrapped up in some of this legislation, we're starting to see a little bit of an IRS, take on blockchain and regulation. So it's a wild time to track that. But I think you raise a good point. It's something that's going to require a new approach, and I think there's a lot of great things in the chat as well that can probably glean some insights from. So thanks for the question. Any other questions from the group? All right. Well, with that, I will hand things back over to Phil and Terry. Thanks again for the opportunity for Joe and I to kind of share a little bit of what we're tracking. Again, we'll make sure everyone has a copy of the presentation, and great to see so many familiar faces again. You won't get rid of us yet, because Joe and I will be in the breakouts here in a moment as well. So look forward to seeing those of you in there. But thanks again for the time.
Well, Dustin, Joe, thanks so much for the presentation. And again, to your point, this is just really a kickoff. There's going to be greater discussion in the breakout groups, but we're also capturing some of your comments in the chat, because these may be areas where we want to explore them a little more closely. I think the point around where are we going with these regulations, not just Mike, what you brought up, but I think for everyone, I think there had been a hope, certainly amongst everyone, that things wouldn't sort of do the elastic band thing and spring back. So it's a little worrying, Mike, that that's happening. I've been a little worried about it as it relates to procurement and some of the strides that were made in procurement. And we're kind of asking around now in terms of our procurement organizations willing to be a little bit more forward leaning, because that's going to make a big impact for all of you guys, obviously, in terms of the way that you look at new technologies. So some great comments in the chat. Keep the chat going, because it's always a great way for us to share new ideas and sort of multitask. So right now, we're going to give you a short break before we go to the breakout rooms, so that you can stretch and refresh whatever is in your mug. And be back in 5 minutes. But we want you to stay logged in. That way, if you do get delayed, you'll already be transitioned into your breakout room when you return. So let me just tell you, before we go there, a little bit about our breakout sessions. Everybody's been assigned to a breakout session based on the preferences that you indicated in the survey. Some of you are going to stay in the breakout session with me. Some of you are going to go with Phil or Dustin or Joe. We've got 3 really exciting topics today. One is the cybersecurity challenges. Second is collaboration in the remote future workplace with Phil. And then 2 rooms have been dedicated because of this great material that Joe and Dustin had. So we have 45 minutes for our breakout sessions. So we are going to want to keep it lively and get everybody engaged. Please be prepared, because if you don't speak up, we are going to call on you. But we would ask you to keep your comments short and quick so we can get everybody in for at least 1 or 2, of the comments to get everybody involved. So we're going to use both the virtual hand raise and the chat function. And if you do have to leave any of the breakout rooms, please don't click the leave button, because that then will eliminate you and take you out of the entire session. Okay, so we're going to take 5 minutes for a break, and then we'll come back and we'll get everybody set up to go into the breakout sessions and go into the next part of our conversation. All right, we'll see you in 5 minutes.
Hi, Terry.
Hi, Phil.
Well, that was a great start for, yeah, that was awesome. Love the chat too. There was some really fun stuff going on in the chat.
Yeah. So it is true that Dustin and Joe do talk fast. Like, oh, I gotta keep up.
We're
Cover
caffeine.
all
We're caffeine.
too much caffeine, Dustin.
Too much
We
caffeine.
understand. You understand.
Like a podcast on 1.5 speed.
That's right. That's right. You were just watching AI, Dustin and Joe. So we had the speed cranked up a little bit.
Nice.
We had to prepare for these sessions.
Oh dear.
Well, yeah, we had to immerse ourselves in the emerging tech. But yeah, we I think we missed the mark. We could have had the session be on funny city names, and that would have been a hit. That was pretty good to follow along.
I like the Bahaba one. That was my favorite.
Bahama.
Bahaba.
I don't know. Dennis came back with Gloucester too. I was going to put that because nobody even know how to spell that. He
Yeah.
spelled it the way it sounds, but
I still can't spell Gloucester.
Gloucester, Worcester.
Worcester.
Up here, yeah, Worcester's Worcester, right?
Worcester.
People call it Worcester.
What's that?
And somebody said Cotuit. Cotuit. It's so true. I love, it's great when you know somebody that can't pronounce Massachusetts when they say Massachusetts. So.
Wait, that's how you pronounce it?
You do, and Massachusetts. You.
And Kurt, what do you call people from Massachusetts?
Massholes.
Yeah.
Well, that's what the people from Maine call people from
Oh.
Massachusetts.
Yeah.
We don't call ourselves that. We
Yeah,
call
okay.
ourselves
Wow.
Connecticut
Kurt.
too, just so you know, it's not just New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Well, Kurt, when you're from Massachusetts,
Good point.
and you live in Maine, you get called that an awful lot.
I know. I know the state troopers call us that. It goes another masshole.
Yeah.
I have good friends on both jobs, New Hampshire and Mass, and I'm one of them. So
Yeah.
I've never been able to escape the stigma.
Yeah.
terrible, isn't it?
Oh,
It's unfair. It's totally unfair. We're very reasonable
I-
people here in Massachusetts, and we drive very, very coolly and calmly.
Yeah.
You know, we don't speed. We don't change lanes without blinking.
Yeah.
Except when you're merging on the expressways. but that's another story.
Well, you know, we invented the roundabout. A quick story. A few years ago, I was out in Phoenix, and we're driving on Interstate 10. I would get off on 17 North, and then they put a couple roundabouts. And there was a guy with me in the car. He was driving. He was from South Dakota. You figure South Dakota's got like one lane, right? One road. He's never seen a stoplight in his life in Pierce, South Dakota. And he tried to navigate the roundabout. It was like hilarious. I said, that's like a right of birth in Massachusetts, the rotary, you know.
You should try to do those in the opposite direction, living in the
I know. Yeah, I've done that
That's
too
a
in Dublin. Almost got killed.
Yeah.
okay, guys, you ready to go into breakouts? Is everybody
Yeah.
ready? All right. Now remember, if you have to leave your room, just turn off your camera, mute yourself. Don't hit the leave button because you'll leave the entire meeting, and then we will have lost you. So, all right, Diana, let's go to the breakout rooms. All right. Great. Well, welcome everybody to the cybersecurity breakout room. So I want to kick it off, and I'm going to call on my good friend Kurt Wood. And Kurt, what we want to talk about today is not the same old blah 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 around cybersecurity, right? But what are some of the new things that you're thinking about as you think about where you're going to go next? What are you focused on today? And a couple of things I would like you to comment on is that, we're hearing a lot about solar winds, and we heard what happened with Colonial Pipeline. Are you looking, or is that changing your approach at all? I mean, is solar winds making you think more about supply chain? Is Colonial Pipeline making you think about the state's role in terms of protecting infrastructure? I mean, what are some of the things that, are out there? Because I want to come back also and then talk about what the heck, you guys got a lot of money coming at you. So what is that going to mean in terms of, is that going to help, or is it just going to set expectations with some challenges around spending it? So let's start out first with, what's new? What are you looking at? And then, kind of move to, are some of these external things that are happening, shifting your focus at all? And then after Kurt, I want to open it up to everybody. So Kurt, can you kick us off?
Sure. Thanks, Terry. Great topic. I think, from where we're at and what's new, I mean, we've been engaged in kind of a, priority on the cyber side for a bit now, like other states, but, we've got some dedicated funding from our capital program and about $135 million spread across a capital bond. And it's really, the gamut from applications to, software, to all sorts of areas here. And I think kind of where we're at right now is that, we certainly recognize the challenges. And I think we all react to the, the ransomware. And, I think it's certainly here, we know that. I think our municipalities are, our business partners, certainly been, hit. We've been fortunate at the state level. I think we've made some, good investments up front, but that's not to say we couldn't be hit. I think the point being simply is that, it's really kind of allowed us to kind of think of things about a little bit differently. We've certainly been able to, strengthen our, from our, focus on education and awareness. We've strengthened our security awareness programs. I've really been focused the last year or so on, bringing this back home to an executive leadership, mindset versus, being an IT thing or a security thing, and really thinking about, from an executive level, at the cabinet level, at the agency head level, or the municipal level, at the political level, our elected officials to really kind of think about security in a different way. So we started to really get on that road from a technology perspective, and from an operational perspective. I think, one of the areas that we're really focused on is really building out, a multidiscipline security operations center. We have a security operations center now, but it's really kind of the traditional kind of IT security kind of response. When you see something, you do something, you mitigate, you get it out there. But we're thinking really more about kind of a fusion center kind of integration type of environment. We have multiple skill sets, we have multiple, agencies and organizations within it. We have a very collaborative framework here in Massachusetts now. So we're investing, from an organizational, we're going to be, engaging and hiring a security operations center team with a SOC director that's really got incident command experience versus just IT security. We're also, investing heavily into, our security framework, our apparatus. We've invested a lot into cloud security with some of the products. We've made some huge investments over the last year or so with our SIM and with our, with our alerting and with our, automation. We're putting in an automation platform, a SOAR platform. We're looking at, different technologies. We're standardizing. And it goes back to some of my other conversations I've had over the past year. So we're really trying to simplify our footprint, simplify the attack surface, moving more into a standard operating environment, which includes, operating procedures. Because I think one of the areas that we really struggle with is, we compete with each other at times from a technology perspective. We need to do a better job of, sharing information, situational awareness, holding people accountable for their actions within the organization. And we've also been hit from, a third-party vendor, as well. We've had a couple instances where some of our vendors have been ransomed, and excuse me, and we learned very quickly our DMV, our registered motor vehicles, a few months ago, that ransomed, not us, but our inspection station, as other states did too. And we quickly realized that the company really was out of their depth of experience and how to handle things. They really didn't have a great security program. They didn't really have a good incident response framework. We actually had to kind of take charge and work through that with them. We also realized the business wasn't totally prepared as well. And we ended up, kind of, getting through it. It worked out well, but as a result, we realized very quickly that, geez, all of our vendors, really, many of them aren't really that sophisticated. And so what's that allowed us to do, or really pushed us to do, is think about things differently. We went back into, we oversee and manage all the IT contracts for the state from a technology standards and security. So we went back in our contract legal team, with our state procurement office and our, legal team, we've started to rewrite our statewide contracts, and, from a due diligence and from, making sure that we have the appropriate language in there. Again, I think, we've always relied on, you will follow the security, enterprise security policy of the Commonwealth, you will do this, you'll do that. I think honestly, not enough people actually follow that. And I don't think the state over the years has done enough to make sure the compliance of that. So we're really refocused on, third-party vendors and, areas like this. We've created a chief risk officer for the organization as well, and started to look at our risk appetite and really think about things differently. From a business perspective, we've implemented an information governance program as well in the Commonwealth over the last year or so. And, from a supply chain, we're certainly, working with our vendor community, and, we're expecting more from them, and really educating our businesses, our agencies, when they write, RFPs and they write procurement documents, and really doing a better job of educating people as a whole. So I think that, we've certainly, focused on the enterprise. I think, we're still learning some areas here. I think, some of the challenges we still have are, just catching up with the volume of things that go on. And I think an area that I think really, that I think all of my fellow CIOs have, experienced, we have a lot of applications out there that, the IT organization was never part of the procurement. We're still catching up. Agencies go off and buy their own product. They end up, doing a SaaS solution, and they just buy something. Nobody knows about it till it's too late. So, we're kind of reining in those, and we've developed some new standards on that, making sure that, we do due diligence. We're implementing, a directive that, anything and everything has to have a pen test. We're going to start doing routine and regular. We already do vulnerability, management, scanning, and mitigation. We're going to up that. We're going to, have a routine, kind of annualized or semi-annual, program where we just kind of go all out and attack our entire business community within. So, and we're also at this point now that we're actually going into our vendor community, doing the same thing with them. Some have been reluctant, some have been okay with it. So, we're working together. I do think that most of the vendors we've worked with, they've had some issues, have been actually very accepting of this. I think, some of the, because again, we depend on some of these smaller niche vendors, that, you have to depend on. One area I just want to close with that was an interesting observation that I don't think, that we really thought much about in the state, is that, the vendor that ends up, getting compromised and then ends up paying a ransom, becomes a liability in the fact that sometimes they can't afford, or they don't have the insurance. And then we go and look at liquidated damages against them, and we might bankrupt that company, or they just will walk away from us. And I think that really gave us, a concern, because we do have a lot of those smaller applications of small businesses that support a lot of our critical business. Not everybody's the big, behemoth. So we had to think about that from a business perspective, and because, at least in my experience in state government, our lawyers immediately want to kind of take somebody out and get all the damages and kind of just crush somebody. And I think we finally realized, well, I've realized for years, but I think the message is found that may not be the best route for people. We may want to think about that a little bit differently, because what's your option if you blow that company? What are you going to do? What do you have a plan? And I think it goes back into also in upfront procurements. Now we need to really think about that, go back into that kind of continuity of government, how are we going to maintain this government service if in fact this vendor fails, and assign kind of the cyber, component of it. So again, a lot of stuff there. I think, I just had a meeting this morning on it, and, I think, our administration is certainly engaged in it. We're moving forward. We're doing a lot more with higher ed, which has always been outside our space now. So we're seeing a lot more collaboration in Massachusetts between our municipal partners and our higher education folks, our independent and constitutional offices. It's not just about the executive branch anymore. So I think people are finally starting to realize that, the fabric that we can weave at a larger scale that, you know, relies on each other on information sharing and situational awareness, and certainly sharing some, you know, tools and services and things of this nature and better practices, you know, will benefit all of us. So that's kind of where we're at this point.
Great. Thanks, Kurt. I like your observation a lot on the supply chain question. You know, I think all of you know I was in the automotive industry for a long time. And one of the interesting things is that, you know, what the automotive industry actually did was to fund some of their critical suppliers, particularly the small guys. And this is a very similar kind of concept to what you're saying. Greg, I'm going to turn to you next. What's going on in Indiana?
Well, Kurt, I appreciate all of your comments. You had a lot to say for sure, and many of the same challenges that you're doing, we're facing as well. So Indiana, our Office of Technology got created in 2005, which consolidated all of our IT operations. And our now governor was a mid-level staff person at the time back then. So a lot of the staffers that were serving under the Governor Daniels in 2005 have come back and are operating now at the upper levels of this administration. And so we recently met with them and talked about not knowing about agency applications. We don't have a view into what agencies are doing there. They all were under the impression IoT, the Indiana Office of Technology, had a full consolidation and were in charge of everything. And we were like, nope, no idea on some of these applications in the slightest bit. We've had problems with Telerik, Windows 2008 servers, trying to get people to upgrade all of those things, and purchasing, everybody, you know, is in the same boat. One of the things that we focused on moving away from is our government center complex, the State House, and 2 government buildings is we're trying to shift our cybersecurity mindset away from we're protecting 3 buildings downtown of Indianapolis to we need to go border to border on our cybersecurity protection. So I'm in charge of our legislative services and trying to get, last year we did pass a bill without a dissenting vote across the board that requires local governments to report cybersecurity incidents to us. So we worked with the trade organizations going forward, state higher education institutes as well, that they need to tell the Office of Technology across 6 different categories if they receive attacks. So ransomware, business email compromise, a few others as well, just so we can get a sense of what is the state of cybersecurity and the state of the attacks across border to border. So we can go to the legislature and say, hey, we need more funding because of all these problems. We're certainly not in a position to respond to these attacks. So right now it is just a collection, but it would help us at least understand what these localities are facing. We just had a pretty big problem with a hospital the other week, it was a week ago today, ransomware, where they had to go to paper everything. In the middle of in the morning, 3:30 in the morning, they had to shut down their network connection and move to paper charts and start sending people to other hospitals. So it's a pretty big problem. And we were able to share some of those indicators of compromise with locals yesterday, because that's part of the legislation where we can take these threat vulnerabilities and share them out so people can understand it. Hey, if I have this system, or I need to look for these IP addresses in our logs to make sure we're blocking them. So I think we made some great progress there legislatively, and we're going to continue to try to build on that in 2022 when the session starts again.
Thanks, Greg. Trina, I'm going to go to you next, and then Morgan, how about you after that?
Thanks, Terry. Greg, I was wondering if you had a bill number or something we can look at for that local government requirement for reporting. That's actually something that we're talking about right now. There's a lot of interest in, you know, how we can get a better idea of what's going on at that level to have, you know, the scope across the state. To your point, we're not necessarily positioned to, you know, hands-on help them based on resource constraints and things like that, but it could help us put something together. I think it was my 3rd week as CIO when I got a call about a small city in Southwest Ohio that may have had a ransomware issue affecting their water treatment facility. So, always something exciting happening, but that would be great. I would love to see that. We're actually working right now with folks from our Department of Public Safety and Homeland Security and National Guard Adjutant General's office to kind of come up with some plans.
Great. So Greg, is that something that you could, may not actually be totally past you.
I'll
but that's
post the
something you
link.
could share?
No,
Okay.
I'll post the link. Yeah, it became law July 1st.
Great.
Okay, great, super. Well, Morgan, let me go to you next. And then after Morgan, I'm gonna go to, what happened to Mark? Where'd he go? There he is. I'm gonna go to Mark after Morgan. So Morgan, go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Terry. So really enjoyed Greg and Kurt's comments, and something Kurt said resonated with me, my own experience when I was CIO for the state of Arizona. And that's, you have vendors that you're trusting with citizen data, and you have to have some mechanism to validate that they are going to secure it the same way we would if it were on-prem in our own data center. So when we actually did our cloud first policy, we had to come up with a way to validate that all the vendors that were on state contract that had whether it was secure, highly sensitive data or not as sensitive, had a mature cybersecurity posture. So at the time, we looked around and we didn't see anybody else doing this. So we copied the FedRAMP guidelines and came up with, ASRAMP, ASRAMP, which is now graduated to state ramp. I'm really happy and proud of JR and Tim Romer to kind of take that up to a national level. But the way we used it was, okay, just because an agency has a procurement exception, and a lot of my larger ones did, doesn't mean you can just sign a contract with any vendor without giving them some sort of validation and verification. So we actually copied the same questions that FedRAMP was using, and depending on the type of data that was hosted, we would actually say, okay, if you have a breach notification policy, send us a copy of the policy. If you have intrusion prevention software, send us a screenshot of it. It's kind of trust but verify. And we went through and we actually certified about 70 vendors in the first year of doing that process that say, okay, they meet the minimum bar for the type of data they're hosting. We can feel confident in that. But there was actually a handful of vendors that didn't meet that bar. And the best story about that was we had a very large agency in Arizona that we told them, these guys are not going to keep the security that we need around this citizen data that you want to host with them. And they said, well, we want to sign the contract with them anyway, because you can't tell us what to do. I said, okay, cool. Here is a risk acceptance form. We need you to sign it all the way up to your agency director, and we will sign it acknowledging that you are accepting the risk. So we got that thing in writing, and no joke, 2 weeks later, that vendor had a breach of 2.1 million Arizona citizen records PII. And I literally had it in writing that said, I told you so. I told you not to do that. So that risk acceptance form is downloadable on JR's State of Arizona website if you guys want to copy it and put your logos on it. But have something as you're going through with, for the vendors that have FedRAMP or soon to have state ramp, great, you can pass them through. But for the ones that don't, make sure you have some way, because at the end of the day, it's going to say your state had a breach, right? And whether it was probably not in central IT agencies, probably going to be in one of the larger agencies. But as long as you have a process to vet that with them, you'll feel a lot better at the end of the day.
Hey, Morgan, thanks. And I'm just going to remind everybody, turn your cameras on if you can. Tom, Jeff, love to see you. I think I saw Morgan out there. So let's get everybody on camera so we know who's out here. So Mark, I'm going to switch gears on you a little bit. And let's talk about all this funding that's coming in. I mean, I'm almost feeling like, you got CISA funds coming, you've got the infrastructure bill coming, you've got whatever coming in funding. And I think, there's a little bit of feeling from when I talk to folks that, wow, the states have all the money they need. Is that how you're feeling? And even with the money, what are you going to do with it?
Well, I do think there are those instances where for some of it and how it's used that we have more than we need, right? That because of how people are thinking about it. And so, we have some folks who are running around saying, oh, I haven't had money in a long time. Here's what I expect. Here's what I think I'm going to spend that on. And it's not sustainable. There was a comment that was earlier, like, how do we can't use this to add, right? We have to use this funds to transform, and to be at the end of that funding stream to be at a lower cost. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean a lower cost in technology. It means a lower cost in government. And so, we had one agency who was looking at some of this to do, they wanted to put in sort of virtual desktops within their, and actually build physical infrastructure to do that. And we're like, wait a minute, like you can't afford that. Like at the end of that, you're going to be operating in a way that no one's coming with anymore, right? And so where does the cost take out? Where's the efficiency come from that's going to allow us to continue this? And we now have them in the a much more sustainable for this particular use case into a cloud-based desktop, right? Because we can bake that into their operating costs and show what that looks like. So I think the sophistication around coming from a sense of need in technology to being flush in many ways is where lots of people are going to run the risk of making long-term mistakes. And so we're trying to look at it as holistically as we can and say it's either something that can go away because we won't need it, or we have to pop out the other end with some greater efficiency. I think a lot of the discussions around digital equity and access, right, is those we can capture those elsewhere. So one of the things, like a multilingual chatbot, right, where we can, maybe it's more expensive to build that up front, but it opens the doors, and each agency would not be able to do that on their own. But if we do that centrally, we can open the door and support it to people who may have had historic barriers to accessing our service. So that's how we're thinking about it. I do think there's huge risks of waste is, the more distributed the decision making gets, and just the sort of short-term thinking that many people are applying to these funding sources.
Mark, let me ask you, you're going through some reorganization of IT. Is that changing the approach in terms of how you're thinking about cybersecurity and how you're going to be working with your agencies?
Yeah, we're centralizing all of our security resources, right? From data security to perimeter and applications, all of that, and it's we've recognized that, and we've had what I'd say are some near misses, like some scares with our agencies that they can't do this on their own, right? And that they've fallen behind, and that the only way that we're going to do this is to do this together. And so the governor and the legislature approved a cybersecurity enterprise IT investment, right, that we're going to add on top of our centralized team to address that. But when we, as a part of the optimization, bringing the people together, we did some environmental scans of what was happening in our environment, and the number of vulnerabilities that were unmanaged across our agencies would make most of you cry. It was a sad state of affairs. It really was, and so that was particularly helpful in convincing people that they'd been doing around. We're lucky that we aren't on the front page, and until we get that resolved, we'll probably still be there.
Great, thanks, Mark. Amy, I'm going to go to you, and then Tony, I'm going to come to you to talk about how that actually is, impacting your strategic plan and thinking. But Amy, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Amy Whedon with Accenture, the public sector practice. I'm on day 14, so I'm a newbie, but I've got some considerable experience in the public sector, having served for the state of Massachusetts under Governor Baker for some time. So, I think for Accenture, where a lot of what we're looking to do is to support clients and reduce risk, which ultimately looking to transform operations holistically. And I think something specific to the public sector, which is always of mind, even with the unprecedented amounts of funds coming in from the federal government, is really to transform operations and reduce costs. And so figuring out how to reduce the complexity of the bureaucratic systems is really top of mind, and partnering with key tech systems in the ecosystem and to allow that to happen. So I'm here to listen and learn. It's so nice to see and meet all of you. And I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Great. All right. Tony, I'm going to turn to you, and then I'm going to go to Jeff.
Hey, Terry, thanks. And I think that's a good question. I listened to Kurt's response regarding the other question. Absolutely thorough, very learned. Thanks so much for sharing with us. I can tell you that right now in New York State, and we developed a strategic plan. We did some alignments with other tools and documents, something that I've never done before, and I was quite impressed with the requirement. But one thing we're looking at now is where the Ciso resides. Where will the CISO reside within the state? Right now, the CISO is assigned to ITS, my organization, and it seems like a good fit. But we have a number of other organizations within the state that have visibility on local districts and counties that have a different role. We are informed when there's been a breach, when something happens, but the governor is really taking a look at where the CISO resides. With regards to funding, very impressive answer. I think it was Craig. It might have been Mark who said they have more money than they can spend. I've never been in that situation ever in federal government or state government. You can send some to me. But what we're trying to do is leverage some of the technologies to reduce the costs in cyber and cyber security in general. For instance, multi-factor authentication, instead of putting it down at an agency at a tool, wrapping around the enterprise. So people have to come in, identifying themselves twice or going through that routine, as opposed to having them go through an agency after they've already entered the enterprise. Bot management is something that we're looking at from a technology standpoint. There are a lot of technologies out there, but our biggest number one issue right now is finding out where that CISO will reside. We'll be able to leverage some efficiencies with that budget that we just don't have anywhere I've ever been. But I think we can capitalize on that once we find out exactly where that individual go. And we will reside, and we'll have some answers after that to identify these efficiencies. So that's where we are in the state of New York. Thanks.
Well, Jeff, I'm interested not only on what's going on in Kansas, but what's your view on the challenge that Tony has about where the CISO should report?
Yeah, and that is a conversation that's been going on in the security space for quite a while. And every state, as we've talked, once seen one state, you've seen one state, because every state is a little bit different in their structure. So here in Kansas, we're actually just kicked off a cybersecurity task force that the governor signed an executive order for to kind of start evaluating just the bigger picture in Kansas of the cyber landscape, because we do have a lot of, my office is relatively new and my position was only established in statute in 2018. So we're still kind of in that first phase of just having that position officially exist within the state. But the task forces in Kansas, we actually do have a lot of great cybersecurity capabilities that have stood up in the past few years. So it's kind of, how do we start working together to help serve the state as a whole? And that's just beyond state government. So we're excited to see where that takes us and what recommendations come out of that task force, because we know there's a lot of work to be done. So we're looking forward to that. So, but to kind of, to kind of go back to the question, I know in our last digital summit that you guys hosted, you had the conversation. So, with some of the challenges, we can throw all sorts of kind of cybersecurity tools in the landscape, but when we look at it, it's we're only as good as our best hygiene. So I'm really looking at kind of taking a concerted effort, because we get in the habit of, in austere conditions, we're just moving to the next project and we forget what's behind us. But it's what we forget that's behind us, hardening our environments, the bad guys are gonna capitalize. So really taking a concerted effort to really take a look at our environments and kind of tune them up and make sure we're following best practices and standards, because a lot of that can actually have a substantial impact on not just preventing compromises, but minimizing the expanse or the what do you want to say, the impact of a compromise if it does happen. So kind of changing that mindset that it's not going to be a matter of if we get compromised, it's probably when and how do we respond and building that resilience. So we're looking at possibly, with some of that funding, maybe professional services to help organizations try and harden their environments and stuff beyond, the tools, but, also taking that strategic approach. How can we protect from an enterprise level and, find those common solutions so it's a lot easier for everyone to operate as well. So.
Well, Tony, I don't know whether you saw Mark's comment, but I don't think he's going to send you any money. Not likely. So what can you say? You're on your own, Tony. Well, let me just shift a little bit, Tommy. I'd like for you to weigh in here on not just the kind of overall cybersecurity issues per se, but one of the things as we talk about ransomware, we really talk about data protection. And I'm interested in whether you're seeing state and local governments actually be thinking about data protection with cybersecurity and not having them be kind of different things, but rather all a part of how we're going to do this kind of ubiquitous zero trust framework that everybody's talking about. Any thoughts on that in terms of what you're seeing?
A lot of thoughts, Terry, and zero trust has been with us. We've been using it since 2004 as a design philosophy. And zero trust really is a philosophy, not a specific action. And it's got to be incorporated in your hardware design. It's got to be incorporated in your software development, and it's got to be incorporated in policies and procedures in operations. I think is really the key for true protection throughout your environment. As things change, the philosophy is not going to change. And so I'm a big fan of zero trust. Data protection, it's reminds me of a company from a retired Air Force Master Sergeant, started up in San Antonio, and he called his company It's All About the Data, AATD. And we talked about this yesterday in our breakout group. It is all about the data. And if you can't protect the data, then you've been had. There is no AI or data analytics or data science without data to start. It's a foundational, it's a first principle. And so you've got to use that to go. And what I see, we at HP, we're a $60 billion company in round numbers. We invest about $3 billion in research every year. So Tony, you need to know where the money is. We're spending a lot of money in this field of the $3 billion. About half of that is focused on cybersecurity, for about $1.5 billion a year, which sounds like a lot of money, but when you compare it to what the adversary is spending every year, it's a drop in the bucket. And so we need to spend that just to keep up, just to have a hope of staying even with the advanced persistent threats. And in there, we're doing some really interesting work. I ask a lot of CIOs in the federal government I work with, how are you doing in training your employees and making sure that they have the knowledge and the tools and the techniques to keep the cyber hygiene at the highest level? And the response is, hey, we had some great tests. We always test for phishing attacks, and we always train the people not to click on the links. And we got, 80% successful that they didn't click on the links. Only 20% clicked. And you almost have to laugh. I mean, it's almost sad that, it only takes one clicking on a link to then escalate privileges and then be in and hiding in their system, waiting for the zero-day attack. And so we bought a company out of Cambridge, England, a professor there at the University of Cambridge, Dr. Ian Pratt, had developed micro virtualization, and you find that now in the NIST documents, NIST 204, 800-204, specifically. And what that does is it spins up any click into about 1,000 micro machines that work together to get you the results, but it never touches the hardware on your system. And so people can click all they want, no damage done. And when you close out the browser, any malware downloaded disappears, it blows up. And so it really has been over 4 billion attempts at downloading malware with our product, 0 penetrations. Not to say that it can't be beat and somebody's going to figure it out eventually, but it is making it where you still want to train your employees, but it's not critical that they get the training or they don't make a mistake. And everybody's going to make a mistake somewhere down the line. The other things we're doing that are really exciting is in tamper proofing. So if a laptop's stolen, the data on there will be wiped if it's tampered with, if it's opened up. We're cryptographically signing chips, and that's on the way, such that no boot's going to occur if somebody's tried to replace a chip or somebody's tried to add a chip to any of our boards.
Well, that's great.
And that's just a drop in the bucket. I could go on, Terry, but I'll stop there because I think those are the most exciting advancements we're working on. But if we don't continue to do that year by year, we're going to be in trouble downstream. And we feel a responsibility to the market to keep that investing. But we also, to the customers, the people that they want to know, hey, we need to get better every year. HP, can you help us?
Yeah. Steve, what's going on in Georgia? And then Nelson, I'm going to go to you. And then Tom, I'm going to let you finish it up. So what's going on in Georgia, Steve?
I mean, a lot of the comments I've heard really resonate. I mean, a couple of the speakers, Trina, Greg, talked about mission, including local government. So that's, Tony mentioned that as well. That's also going on here, where we're seeing that the current administration is, their view is all governmental subdivisions are still part of Georgia. If they have a problem, we need to help them. So we've just had some legislation passed around notification, and our security office has responded to a couple of ransomware events. And I think what we're discovering, and this is where like Greg's comment about, just defending 3 buildings downtown in Indianapolis kind of really resonates for me, is, our consolidation play only works for the people that got consolidated. We've got all kinds of both small state governments kind of in the long tail who didn't get consolidated, and local governments where the bar for the hackers is pretty low. They don't air gap their backups or whatever the thing is. And then the hackers come and we've got a real problem. And then meanwhile, on the supply chain front, I think what SolarWinds taught us is the sophistication of, especially if you're dealing with nation states, is really infinite. And, I don't know what we could have done differently to sort of defend against that. I mean, I think all we can really do is focus on being able to respond more quickly when these events surface. So yeah, no magic bullets here, just more scope, more problems to work on.
Yeah, well, I think though, Steve, the point you make about, the greater consolidation, actually a recognition to the point that Mark was making earlier, that everybody needs to get in the same tent. That's a big deal, So Nelson, let me get your 2 cents. What's going on in Virginia?
Yeah, Terry, sorry, I really wanted to join this event here both days, but we've had not cyber crises, more along of operational demands here. And so in general, I think I can speak for you, and I'm glad that your company's there, the Center for Digital Government, to help us, because I'm seeing there's no let up for the demand of digital services at the state and local level. And it runs the entire spectrum of the OSI model, all the way from infrastructure all the way up to application layer, and so cybersecurity and so on. So my only message is, that's one of the reasons I missed that first day and a half of this thing, is because we're responding as quickly as we can to a recent executive directive, which that's for us, North Carolina and Maryland are all about the same, which is in relatively short order roll out a vaccine tracking application. And so we have a viable product. I just got out briefing it to the cabinet, and we're just trying to figure out if we make it mandatory, because we're going to use it. So we'll be able to get that thing done here. But that would be my message, is we're rolling that out as fast as we can so we can meet an executive directive from the governor. The other thing that's going on for us is, we're rapidly looking at addressing the needs of the American Rescue Plan funding, specifically broadband. And we're anticipating any type of, if there is a grant money for cybersecurity coming down the road, how we anticipate that. So in our case, Terry, it's those areas are coming down big time for us, how we address that. And for those who haven't been paying attention to news, Virginia has an election this year, gubernatorial election in just under 3 months, and us in New Jersey, I think it is. And so we're kind of off cycle, but we're also preparing for that. And then we have obviously a budget cycle. But for us, Terry, it's my only message for digital states instead of digital government is, the demand for digital services is there, ability to address it both with the technical suppliers, got Hewlett Packard and Amazon and other suppliers that are members on the line. It's there. And so we're looking for partnerships. We're looking for ways, hey, what solutions bring to the table? And that would be my message for this particular forum.
Well, thanks, Nelson. All right, Tom, we're going to get you in here. So what are you seeing out there from a cybersecurity perspective? I know you're, new to some of this space, but any observations on, things that are happening out there?
Yeah, like I said yesterday, McAfee is redoing itself. Now it's McAfee Enterprise, which is owned by STG, which they'll roll a bunch of cybersecurity companies together to make a better pure play cybersecurity company in the next year and in the coming months. What we're seeing is, it used to be you just protect the end device, protect your servers, real simple. It's not that way anymore. It's about the data, just like Tommy said. It's about everything. It's about the lateral movement within the networks to cloud to everywhere. The hackers are so good now, and people are still ignorant clicking on things. It's even now we have to look at the mobile devices, because especially y'all at the government, any person that has an application on their phone that could get into a cloud database, well, now you got another vulnerability place. So, it's everything and all above. It's not just one solution, it's multiple layers. And, you can't just stick products on there and forget about them anymore. I mean, that's the key, is you got to be very aware, very proactive, and just moving forward continually, because it's changing daily, not hourly. So.
Great. Well, I appreciate that. Thanks, Tom. Well, Tony, let me just come back to you. I know you were talking about the challenges that you've got from a Ciso perspective. Are you really, starting to also think, Kurt was talking about sort of more of a risk management framework. Let me ask the group, is anybody actually looking at having a separate risk management office? Do you have that already? How's that working?
We actually have in New York a chief risk officer. Right now, I have a vacancy in that position, but my policy person is sitting there. We evaluate risk in everything that we do. I think it's a good strategy and a good tactic when you're trying to deploy resources or you're looking at purchasing a new resource. It's a good thing to do. It comes from my military background as well. I can't take credit for saying that. I put it in place because it was there. It's an asset that I think every organization needs. To evaluate risk from every perspective is important. I think that's one of our management responsibilities.
Thanks, Tony. Greg, got anything to add there? I mean, what are you doing in Indiana?
Risk management is kind of built into our central IT office. So we're not going to spin that out in that sense, but we are. A big area we're looking at for risk is disaster recovery. As we get a look at the applications that agencies have, we know of about 1,500. We know there's an unknown amount that we don't know about, a known unknown, if you will. And only 107 have disaster recovery right now. So we're trying to raise awareness to agencies that if you have a critical application, you probably need to have disaster recovery, and there's likely more than 107 applications at the state that an agency would consider really critical for their agency operations.
Oh, that's great. Thanks. Thanks, Greg. I think that's great. That's a great observation. Morgan, what are you seeing out there as it relates to just chief risk officers and how they're getting deployed in the different areas?
We're working with a number of risk officers across the states, and actually we just added a former alumni of state government to our team. Maria Thompson came over, former Ciso of North Carolina, and she, worked together on that whole of government security approach, not just protecting the state resources, but also cities, counties, tribes. So we're looking at, like others have said, it's when the attackers hit, we need to band together to help protect that. But understanding what risks are out there, and are we accepting them? Are we documenting them? A lot of us have had risk registers or key risk registers in the past. You definitely want to have acknowledged that and documented that, so it doesn't look like it's a surprise to you if and when those things happen. But just understanding that, regardless of, I know what Tony's going through, where they fall in the organization, you have to make sure that you're working with those folks and the legal aspect to understand, okay, what's our attack surface, if you will? What things are we taking responsibility for? What are we mitigating? And what are we outsourcing to third parties? Another reason to move to the cloud, obviously, is a lot of those compliance things you don't have to do. The providers will be doing that for you, and it's one less thing you have to worry about internally as a government.
Great. Thanks, Morgan. Well, I think we got everybody back. I hope you all enjoyed your breakout sessions, and thanks again to my moderators, Dustin and Joe and Phil, for taking care of those other sessions for me. Nelson, did you have something to add to the group?
It's Nelson. I had a question for Morgan, and basically the risk registers, risk things is one of the things that I've had a chance to at least experience in my time at the house and the time here is that getting somebody to sign up for who owns the risk, that always, you can identify it, but it boils down to who owns it and who's going to take action on it. Morgan, the real question is for you, Morgan, and anybody else in the call, is that have you had any chance to get any traction on basically accountability on who owns the risk? That's the question.
Yeah. Well, let me hold that for, go ahead, Nelson. Or go ahead, Morgan. I'm sorry.
It really comes down to who owns the business applications, right? Which agency is that? And understanding, from the agency leadership, who they're assigning it to. The central IT, we can only do so much. It's not our applications. It's not even our customers. The agencies are our customers. So, but having that documented before the event happens is key.
All right. All right. Well, we're going to go right into our CIO roundtable. So again, for this part of the agenda, I want everybody to turn your cameras on. And I want to have you all use your virtual hand raise, and we'll call on you on turn. But I have a couple of folks that I've asked to help us kick off. I really would like to get some response and some feedback on, you heard a lot from Dustin and Joe. We were laughing a little bit that they talk so fast that we were all trying to keep up. But I want to just get some feeling in terms of, what did you hear? And how did that potentially impact the way you're thinking about innovation and your future plans? So I'm going to start with Kevin. So Kevin, can you unmute and kind of give me some idea how this is going to impact you in Montana?
Well, first of all, I wish I would have seen this a week earlier or 2 weeks earlier. Last week, I got all of my CIOs across the entire state together to do to build out the statewide strategic plan. So a lot of this we were talking about last week. A lot is very common within there. The need for shared identity. They came up the data standards, the citizen centric approach. But there were a few things in here, the adaptive and agile. While we're trying to do more agile, we're looking at adding scaled agile within the organization. Would love to hear more on what folks are doing there. And then one of the kind of ahas that I was that came out of that as well was, while we're planning on going API driven, microservices, I wasn't really thinking of that outside of the state. I was thinking of it only internally versus potentially making some of that available and essentially sharing some of that work with business outside that could potentially even profit from, creating a better citizen experience. So those are just a couple of thoughts that came to mind as we walked through that. But it was a great presentation overall.
Well, great. Thank you. Cindy, did you have a comment? I saw you had raised your hand.
I did not. I accidentally did that because I was looking at the chats. So sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, Trina, I'm going to just check in with you. What did you hear from Dustin and Joe's presentation that resonated with you?
Yeah, I thought they shared a lot of great information, of course, some of that around the pace of change, certainly in the expectations of the public sector to innovate. I think we were pretty, we were going down that path on some things prior to the pandemic, and the pandemic clearly accelerated them. I think everyone kind of had that experience. One of the things that we were testing around with our Bureau of Motor Vehicles is called GILO, Get in Line Online. And they were just kind of testing that out. Well, when the BMVs opened back up and we knew there was going to be this rush of people trying to come in and, do their driver's license test. I had a 16-year-old boy at that point who needed his test as well. So we implemented that across the BMVs. So you could go in and, get your spot in line. And when you got there, you check in and there you go. And actually, when I took him, we got a lot of bad looks from people who thought we were cutting in front. I was like, no, it's check online. You can do it right now on your phone. So I think a lot of those expectations, we talked about, as well as some of the things they were talking about around the hybrid work, because we're right now in Ohio working with our staff on the plans to return to office. So we've got everyone, we're working on our telework agreements and all of those things, putting those in place to have people back in after Labor Day. So all of that certainly resonated as well.
Thanks, Trina. Greg, so how did this impact, I guess, your thinking for the state of Indiana?
I was really interested, and I think they've talked about this in maybe 2020 or 2019, but government as an API, and our thinking around that has certainly evolved. One of the key projects I've been working on since 2017 is single sign-on / single identity across the state of Indiana. And we've made a lot of headway on that over the past 13 months, going from 20,000 users to 875,000 this morning. So our next step is actually making it an API system. So when a user comes in and makes account changes, they're going to be able to notify other agencies that we know they have connections to. So it truly, I'm supposed to see the sort of blueprint for that next week, an API for internal data sharing. So I'm super interested in that and would love to connect with them and hear what others may have done around that.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Tommy.
Yeah, I thought it was an excellent presentation, and they certainly covered the waterfront and hit all the buttons that I've been trying to follow and look at. The one that I think was missing out of there was the quantum impact, and this is not the quantum computing, which is still many years off. This is the quantum information science. It's the encryption, it's the key distribution, it's the sensing and the true random number generator that's going to come out of the quantum field. This is going to have a major impact on our IT society, and the sooner you get the vision of it and see it coming, the better prepared you're going to be.
Well, thanks, Tommy. That's a great observation. Well, let me check in with my moderators and get some sense of the discussion in your groups, because again, we want to hear from everybody, but I'm interested in kind of how the discussion went in the group. So Phil, can I start with you?
You bet. We had a great discussion. We had a very lively group, and we talked about collaboration in the remote workplace. And we started talking about what everybody's doing to make that better and how to work on the culture and how to engage their people. Communication, big part of the discussion. And then we even talked about doing some fun stuff like, are you doing trivia? Are you trying to do some team building things? And in all of that, we also talked, do they have the right tools? The discussion was very robust, and I think we got a lot out of it. a lot of great sharing in the chat and some other information. So we had a great session, Terry.
Oh, great, Phil, thanks. Joe, can you give us some idea on how the conversation went in your group?
We too had a great conversation. I think it was great to dovetail from our keynote right into the emerging tech panel. But I think we actually talked a lot about balancing the emerging tech with the moment of crisis, and how do you work with elected and appointed officials to make the case for emerging tech, which was a fascinating discussion. But great feedback from both our industry audience and our state representatives.
Great, Joe, thanks. Well, any other comments from the group on either your breakout groups and some of the conversation, or anything from the session that Joe and Dustin did? At all?
Harry,
we had a great, go ahead,
hey,
Amanda.
I'm gonna say I just want to say I thought Dustin and Joe's presentation was great and so much food for thought. And I just kept coming back though to it all tied back to workforce issues again, as I'm thinking through, I know we've got great partnerships out there in the industry to enable that technology, but we still need state folks to be able to to run those programs and to those points. So that kind of what is, it's just been top of mind for me and thinking through that a lot. So I enjoyed, I know we talked a little bit about it in our panel with Joe, and it sounds like Phil covered it as well, because we're looking at our workforce, and we had a recent report that came out, and it showed that, for our state, the under 30 demographic and state employment had the highest turnover. And we have the low end where we have the highest turnover, and then we have a huge group of folks who are fixing to retire. So that kind of puts us in a real bind and a real challenge on that. And it also showed that it's like 13 state agencies that said that IT was the top occupational category that was the most difficult to fill. And so I have no answers, solutions, anything to that, other than just throwing it out as that's something that we're really we're working on and focusing on that whole of state government approach to try to look at some of those IT challenges, because they are not insignificant as we move forward.
Yeah, I think that, the other piece, and I want to get Phil's input on this, that I think that goes with that is a bit of concern that with all of the federal monies coming in, we certainly don't want to give the perception that it's just purely about monies coming in, if you will, from the outside. And the challenge of spending those effectively, really to your point, is a big part of who have we got, and how can they effectively make sure that things are being done. Phil, let me turn to you as a comment on what Amanda was talking about.
Yeah, and Amanda, such great information there and foresight of what you're talking about. And I was thinking about too, is all that work that you're doing at the state level and everything everybody's doing at the state level to go ahead and figure all this out. I just wanted to put a pitch in there for local government. And the reason I say that is the local governments are going to be trying to figure this out as well. And I think that struggle is going to be this pitched battle of all this money, as Terry was saying, is going to be coming. How do you prioritize that? How do you do it the right way? And by the way, how do you deliver it with your team? How do you deliver it with the people you have and the partners that you have to get it done? I think this is going to be a critical point, because I believe the public is looking at government right now and saying, hey, during the pandemic, we gave you a break because we realized things were going to potentially break. Now you've got all this money and you've had this time to think. Now what are you going to do? And I think this is a great opportunity for state government and local government to truly partner on how to do this the right way.
Thanks, Phil. Any comments on that?
It's a great
Amanda?
point. Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, it's a great point, Phil. And I think it can, that's something that we need to work on here. We engage with the locals, certainly from a procurement perspective on the services we offer, and then with cybersecurity. But you're right, pulling them in on all levels. maybe this is just one more thing that we have to look at with that whole of state approach, right? To that cybersecurity is a team sport, IT workforce is a team sport, everything's a team sport. So,
For sure, for sure. All right, well, now I want everybody to turn on your cameras because we are gonna do another group photo. So everybody needs to smile and hold it for 30 seconds so we can get a picture. All right, Lisa, you got it? Okay, we were sort of like frozen in time there, Lisa. I was kind of wondering.
Have to get to both pages.
Yeah, exactly. All right, now, before we wrap up today, I told you that we were going to have some fun. So most of you received a gift from us, including a deck of cards, or you can use a deck of cards that you have. And we are going to play our version of Lucky CIOs. Now, Phil, remember that Dennis was really disappointed that he didn't win yesterday. So you're going to kind of have to keep that in mind as we go forward. So Phil, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, I hope Dennis has better luck today then, because we are going to play a very simple game. So what I'd like everybody to do is shuffle their deck of cards, shuffle them up really good. No setting the deck. So you can, if you want to shuffle up here so everybody can see it, that's okay as well. And then when you're done, just so you know, when we're done with this game, the winner on the public sector side is going to win a $20 gift card, a $20 gift card. On the private sector side, you're simply going to get bragging rights. And I'm sure it's something that you could put in the corner of your online profile that you won Lucky CIO for the private sector. All right, here's how we're going to play. So we have the deck of cards, and I know I had a misguided youth. I'm, a young Italian guy, and we used to cut cards all the time on the way to school. And we would always cut cards. What we're going to do is we're going to simply cut cards, and you're going to pick the card that comes, and then you're going to hold it up to the screen. So anybody, you're going to cut your cards. So make sure they're good and shuffled, and everybody get ready. Hamad, you picked early, so everybody get ready. So you got to pick again. Everybody's got to pick again. Ready? When I say go, you're going to pick from the deck. So shuffle the deck of cards, and everybody cut the cards and hold your card up to the screen. Okay, who has aces? I see Janae with an ace. So Janae, could you put your virtual hand raise up? Terry had an ace. Katrina, you have an ace. Let's see, anybody else have aces that I didn't see? If you do, put your virtual hand raise up for me. All right,
That's
private sector folks, if you don't have an
That's
ace.
a lot of aces, man. That is a lot of aces.
But private sector folks, if you didn't have an
Dennis
ace.
got one.
All right, but if you didn't have an ace, if you had a king, private sector partners, did you have a king? If you did, put your virtual hand raise up for my private sector folks that had a king.
I had an ace.
Oh,
Private sector.
Tommy did? Tommy had an ace. All right. So sorry, whoever else. So Morgan, you had an ace as well? All right. So now here we're going to go. Private sector people, I want you to shuffle your cards again. So Tommy and Morgan, shuffle those cards. Janae, you had an ace too, didn't you? So Janae, make sure you shuffle your cards up. And then cut again and hold your card up to the screen. So let's see. Janae, what did you end up with? A 6. Morgan had a 4. Tommy?
I'm cutting. Queen.
A queen. Tommy, you're the winner of the private sector. You get the bragging rights.
I brag anyway, Phil.
Well done. Well done. All right. So Katrina, there was another public sector person that had an ace. Was it Dennis?
Dennis.
Dennis, keep your hand raised for me if you could, your virtual hand raised. All right. So between Katrina and Dennis, shuffle those cards. We used to do this on the way to school, so I will tell you we did that a lot.
These are a rigged deck of cards, Phil.
They're not rigged.
They're not a symmetric front. And if you don't have a symmetric front, you can do all sorts of tricks with a deck of cards.
Well, Tommy, thanks for sharing that. But all I know is we had a great design for the front. We like it. And so, but we'll take that. All right, Dennis and Katrina, please cut your cards and hold them up to the screen. Katrina has a, is that a jack? What do you have, Dennis? I can't see it. What do you have there, Dennis?
You're on mute, Dennis.
Yeah, for some reason, my card won't show, but it's a king.
It's a king. All right, Dennis, you are the winner of the $20
All right,
gift card.
Dennis.
So look, you were so worried yesterday, and look what happened today. You won. All right, everybody, that's our game. Lucky CIOs.
I guess my whining helped, huh?
Yeah, there you go. Terry, it's all yours.
Thanks. And by the way, guys, this was not rigged, but good for Dennis. All right. Well, we're really at the end of our 2021 Digital Estate Summit. Yesterday, I talked about how honored I am to really have all of you here at the summit. We heard about about leadership from Renee. We heard about what's coming next from Dustin and Joe. We had great breakout sessions, and it was really good just to see everybody and get together. So I want to just remind you about a couple other events that you're going to be hearing from us on. On September 15th, we have our virtual government experience summit, which includes our government experience awards. So please put that on your calendar. We really are inviting this year, not just those of you who submitted for the awards, but everyone who's working in that government experience space. Not only all of you, but you have folks that are effectively working in that space. And we want to bring everybody together in a forum like this to talk about best practices. We're going to have presentations, and then we're also going to have breakout groups, just like we had for this summit. So please, when you get that invitation, think about what that means for yourself, but also in terms of who you would like to invite to be a part of that. Next, we are hoping, and I have got my fingers crossed, that we will have an in-person NASIO. Obviously, I think we're all kind of watching the signs to see whether that'll happen. I certainly have not yet heard anything from NASIO in terms of what they're planning, but we're still thinking we're going to be in person. So you've all received an invitation from me for our annual dinner. We're going to do that on the Sunday night after the opening reception. And we've just got a great venue lined up. It's really the Museum of Pop Culture. So I think it's really going to be a fun event, great chance to everybody walk around and kind of have another chance to chat. So we'll keep our fingers crossed for NASIO in October. Now remember, have fun with friends and family. Even though or whether we're coming out of this or we're coming out and going back in, I think we all got to think about ourselves and our families and all the folks that work with us as much as we can do to really support them as we're making our way, hopefully out, but certainly maybe with a little bit of a blip. I definitely want to thank our sponsors because without our sponsors, this would really not be possible. Accenture, Adobe, AWS, Easy Vote Solutions, HP Inc., McAfee Enterprise, NIC, SHI International Corp., Verizon, and Yline. So thanks everybody for being with us today. Hope you can take a breather in 3 extra minutes in your day before you go off to whatever you're going to be doing next. And again, we'll look forward to seeing you at Government Experience, look forward to seeing you at NASIO, and Center for Digital Government has some other activities planned as well. So we'll be reaching out to you to be a part of those as well. All right, from Phil and I, take care, everybody, stay safe, and we will see you soon. Take care, bye.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.